Welcome back to Capital H. Professor, consultant, statistician, innovator, William Edwards Deming, originator of the methods we now know as Lean, among other things, famously once said, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." Deming was advancing the need to be data-driven in our decision-making in companies and businesses today. This statement, this goal, it seems pretty foundational. It seems almost elementary in today's world. And yet, as past listeners of this podcast will know, being data-driven with regards to the humans in our organization, the people side of business, well, let's just say that most organizations are on a journey. The field that's grown up around this effort in the last few years, people analytics as it's commonly known, is full of examples of great impact, and many that are maybe less so. Again, a journey. Joining me today to talk about that journey are my colleague, Bill Docherty, Managing Director and leader in Deloitte's Human Capital People Analytics practice. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, David.
And Nicholas Garbis, Vice President of People Analytics Strategy with One Model. Thanks for coming, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Let's dive in. So let's start with a bit of background. This is still a relatively nascent field. Our listeners, I think, will benefit from hearing how you've come to this space as an opening to understanding maybe its potential and its challenges. Bill, I'm going to start with you. Give us a sense of your career journey in this field of people analytics. How did you come to this domain? What were some of your formative experiences?
I've spent nearly my entire 30-plus year career focused on building and implementing enterprise-class solutions to assist organizations in optimizing the impact of human capital. Much of my early formative experiences were really focused on the impact of learning and development within organizations. And that has always involved the use of data to assess impact. Just about any organization I've worked with that is actually making significant investments in developing their workforce really wants to measure the impact of those investments. Which learning programs are having the most impact on my sales performance or my customer support client experiences? I really do love uncovering hidden insights that are not immediately apparent to organizational leaders and can drive transformational change.
So, Nick, a similar question to you. What brought you to this point? And I guess even maybe bigger picture, what do you love about people or workforce analytics broadly?
I think the background that I have coming in from actuarial science, which is applied math for modeling risk in insurance and in consulting practices, that was my foundational knowledge set that I brought into operational roles and finance roles in a retail setting, and eventually found my way into HR because I understood the operations and was involved in an HR technology rollout project. From there, I knew the data and I knew the design of metrics as a practice in operations, and proceeded into people analytics, the time being called HR analytics or workforce analytics. I dove into it slightly fearful about the ambiguity, the big difference between operational metrics and people metrics, the ability to solve some of these really long-running problems, things like attrition or things like development or recruiting, which play out over longer time frames. So it was really just a very intriguing puzzle to be solving. And over time, have chosen to make this my career. And now it's extending into about 2 decades.
Nick, I'm going to stay with you. So you're sort of solving these sorts of puzzles. This seems like the start to the answer to this question, but maybe go a bit further. Why people analytics? Why do we think organizations should be more data-driven in the people side of their business decisions? Why is this a thing?
Because nothing is getting done without the people in the organization. And the problem set being, like I said, quite ambiguous and very large, has, I think, deterred a lot of the analytical thinking in the past from being applied. There were waves of it over history, but in the, let's call it modern era, there really hasn't been the degree of analytical application into this space. And why does it matter? From a company perspective, it's going to be that if you're a chip manufacturer and you're trying to expand, you can probably find the locations and buy the real estate, but you need the right people to be involved in this in terms of designing the chips and staffing those fabrication facilities. So the amount of need to understand the people dimension of your business has just increased more and more over time. Labor shortages are certainly making that more pronounced. And that means that you have all of the modeling figured out perhaps in your finance side, and you've refined your supply chain a ton. The people side has been still, let's say, underdeveloped, underappreciated. And I think that also, as we look to make work more meaningful for folks, understanding the employee experience is an analytical exercise, and understanding the employee experience to make that experience better so that people are enjoying their jobs and staying with their jobs and doing better work. It's also a piece of the puzzle for the analytics practitioners.
Bill, Nick referenced both internal workforce decisions and I think broader labor market conditions as reasons why. What would you add in terms of why this is a thing? Why are organizations building this capability to be data-driven in their workforce decisions?
I think the need and the demand has always been there, but I think it has just grown exponentially. Certainly one factor, the COVID pandemic and the impact on the workforce really opened the eyes of many leaders on both the importance of using workforce data effectively so they can make actionable decisions, particularly in very disruptive times, and the opportunity to improve their own maturity in this area. I think there's a lot of organizations that were really caught off guard in terms of their ability to make effective decisions, given the lack of insights that they had at their disposal. So our Deloitte research shows that less than 10% of executives feel they have the information they need to make sound people decisions. So there's huge opportunity there. And we believe that bringing together the right data strategy, innovative technology solutions like those from one model, and a sustainable people analytics operating model are key to providing the workforce insights that organizational leaders are hungry for. We also see increasing demand for data-driven people decisions from business leaders who are tasked with managing an increasingly hybrid workforce. This is not an HR insight issue. This is an enterprise insight issue, and business leaders that actually have to make difficult decisions around hiring, how they actually improve retention, where they actually locate their workforce. They need better insights to actually make those data-driven decisions.
Okay, so Bill, you've convinced me. I'm one of those CEOs. I don't think I have the data I need. Let's talk strategy. As we begin to create this capability for people analytics, where do we choose to play? How do we win? What goes into that broader people analytics strategy ideally?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. We actually think of the people analytics strategy as being just one component of a four-pronged overall people analytics operating model. The strategy is one of those. The talent. What talent do you have in the organization to actually drive this transformational change to be more data-driven? Next is there's an entire governance component. I'm sure we'll talk about in more detail throughout our conversation. And then lastly, there's how are these insights actually integrated into broader business processes? So when we work with clients, we basically propose that they first start by looking at that broader operating model with their actual strategy really just being one component of those four pieces. At the end of the day, there's a couple of key factors that we're going to talk about that we've seen are really key. When we actually did our research, we actually looked at 7 key factors that really distinguished what we called kind of high performing organizations that were doing a really effective job at using data to make decisions to organizations that were still maturing in that area. And 2 of those in particular that I think we're going to talk about in more detail is one is they've got to actually build better data proficiency. And a second aspect is they really actually need to continue to build trust and transparency in the data. I think actually focusing on all of those aspects of the operating model that I talked about are really important to helping organizations build the capability that they need.
So, Nick, Bill jumped into a number of different possible things that should be included in sort of just how we get started, what the strategy actually is for people analytics. What would you add? And I think one of the things he talked about was also operating model. Where does this fit into the broader strategies and the broader operations of the wider organization?
Let me start by stepping one level up from strategy. I think it's really important that every people analytics team start with a very clear mission. And the one I would recommend for them to consider is to drive better, faster, more data-informed talent decisions at all levels of the organization. That phrase, better, faster, more data-informed talent decisions at all levels of the organization, has evolved. We have to make sure that every talent decision that could use data has the opportunity to use data. And when we start with that mission, that starts to inform the other pieces that Bill was talking about, including the talent, what roles you're going to have on your team, including things that people may not be thinking that much about right now, like change management and communications roles, which really are important, whether they're a one-person role or shared by multiple people kind of doing different things. But there are definitely big-time communication and change management tasks here. And all these pieces come together. When done well, you achieve a level of velocity or acceleration in the value you're creating for the organization.
The organization, though, is used to data in some way. Finance, for certain, marketing, sales, supply chain, operations. In many ways, these other functions have been reasonably data-driven for some time. In many ways, when we talk about the people side of things, the HR side of things, the HR function's kind of late to this game. Make a case for why making those informed talent decisions is of as much of an advantage to those other functions. This isn't an HR problem. So why is the value of this as much a value for those other functions?
I think the value right off of the top here is that the people are an input to every piece of the business. Copper is an input to creating a wind turbine. It's an input into the supply chain, but it's not a critical input to every other piece of the business. So you have a lot of analytics that might go into the commodities trading that totally outpace the analytics that are going into the people piece. I do think that there's a recognition now that we have the ability to do more with this type of information, and that we should. Frankly, the HR function itself wasn't leaning right into this piece of their work. They weren't seeing this as core to what they're doing. These days, chief human resource officers, chief people officers, they are creating positions directly reporting to them, which are elevating this practice, this domain. And the boards and the C-suite are demanding more and more. And that's at the center of the organization.
Yeah, any leader that I've interacted with over my career would agree that their people are the lifeblood of their business, that they've achieved their organizational successes over time as a result of the extraordinary contributions of their workforce. However, those same individuals would agree that they have a better handle on the data on their supply chain than they do on their workforce. From a practical standpoint, any significant workforce issue, whether it be higher than expected attrition or a challenge in recruiting new talent, these all have an impact on day-to-day operations, and every function feels it. Therefore, the ability for the organization to use data more effectively to identify and address the root cause of these challenges really has a broad impact on every function and every employee. In addition, I think workforce insights should not be considered in a silo. Most organizations that we collaborate with are looking to provide insights that require bringing data together across finance, operations, and sales to assess the impact of workforce investments on these functions.
Bill, earlier you brought up this notion of a broader operating model. You referenced our research on people analytics and what it says about the dimensions that separate those organizations that are driving greater impact with their people data from the rest. I think frequent listeners of this podcast will know something about our people analytics maturity model. One of the findings of that high impact people analytics research was that technology, while it's important, it's essential given the sort of speed of business today, the mountain of data under which we're buried. It's essential, but by itself, it's not a predictor. It's sort of all in the execution. What are your thoughts broadly on the role of technology in people analytics?
Well, I do agree with you. I mean, it is an absolutely critical component, right, to help organizations accelerate and scale their journey in making data-driven people decisions, but it's certainly not just a means to an end. What I think we've seen is a robust people analytics technology platform will be instrumental in assisting organizations in truly democratizing access to insights. I like what Nick said earlier around starting with basically a mission. And for many of our clients, part of their mission is how do they actually move from data being the domain of a small group of experts, right? So they can expand it. So actually every business leader is fluent in the data and knows how to use the data to make timely decisions. But I've seen organizations leverage a technology approach that may work in delivering insights to a very small core group of leaders, But as they look to actually expand their access to that data, it doesn't scale those insights to thousands of their next level management team members. In addition, a people analytics technology platform can be an important component in implementing a multifaceted security model. Ensure that the right insights are delivered to the right individuals with the right level of detail. And it's all around kind of providing individual insights that are important to their particular business problem at a given point in time.
Nick, you've worked for a technology provider in the people analytics space now for some time. How do you advise clients on the best use of technology to get them where they want to go?
One model has a people analytics platform, which allows the data from upstream HR and non-HR systems to be brought in and integrated and made ready and then delivered in visualization and in data science outputs. Think about the upstream systems first. You have to have upstream systems and processes that generate data, and those have to generate good quality data. You have some dependency on those things, although you can do a lot with data that's not complete and perfect, because you can do a lot of processing after the fact on it. The heart of the people analytics function is to have a data asset that is flexible and nimble, that you're going to be able to create those deliverables off of that. That's the focus of a lot of our work, is to get that data asset right. Then what our customers do, having that and having the visual capability, is they move into design mode. They take the standard content that we develop and they create many of their own things. And what they're doing is figuring out where is the lever that's going to be of greatest value in their business. And in some cases, as Bill mentioned, getting this out all the way to the managers or even to individual employees, getting that data out into the organization and having a security model and scalable solution that can do that. So each one of the companies that we work with, and I think generally this is true across the domain, has to look at what things are they going to solve first and what's going to create the most value, and then create, in a kind of product mindset, create the products or deliverables that are going to solve for that and create the most value from the investments they're making in their team.
All right, we have a strategy. We've thought about where we're going to use people analytics broadly. We've thought about how technology is going to help us get there. When we think about how most organizations put this all together, they usually start to build a defined unit, a team, a center of excellence or expertise. Let's wrap up today's conversation with focusing on that group itself. What does it look like? Nick, I'll start with you.
Yeah, this is something that I am putting the final touches on a paper on this exact topic, and it's called Blueprint for Building a People Analytics Team. And the elements of a team are, you're going to have a data team or person or just set of responsibilities. They're responsible for that data asset, metrics, catalog, governance, and security. You're going to have a product team that's focused specifically on creating content and getting feedback on that content and making sure it's working, measuring utilization, running MVPs on new content that you're developing. You're going to need to have an insights team. This is more of a consulting team that's grabbing problems proactively or assisting deep into the organization to assist people with complex projects, doing the big projects for the board and the chief people officer. Advanced analytics team that's going to be building and managing your predictive models. And then lastly, a workforce planning team that's working on helping to define what the workforce of the future looks like. So it's data, products, insights, advanced analytics, and workforce planning. Even if you're 3 people, you're going to have to spread yourself across those. It's like if you're a band, you've got to have people playing each one of those instruments in order to be creating real value in this function.
Bill, what would you add to Nick's portrait? Also, could you comment on where this team, this center of excellence or expertise, where does it sit in the organization broadly with an eye towards its tightest possible alignment with its internal clients and ultimately driving the greatest business impact?
I agree with all of the points that Nick made, and I would also maybe pull it up a level and think about those 4 key tenets that I mentioned: strategy, talent, governance, and integration with business processes. We've seen organizations are really effective if they can identify a named leader to drive each aspect of that operating model. Now, for some organizations, based upon their size and shape, that might be a separate leader for each aspect of the operating model, or it be more of a shared function. But it's really important that someone owns the overall mission that Nick mentioned earlier and the supporting strategy, and driving the evolution of that mission and strategy over time in collaboration with business stakeholders. That is not going to be set one time and remain static. Another aspect of this is on talent. It'll be important that someone is continually evaluating the talent on this center of excellence team, how it needs to evolve as technology and business insight needs to change over time, and how much of that talent should sit within the organization and where you should tap into that talent externally. And the same thing would hold true of obviously governance, and that's governance both in terms of data and process and content governance, and then integrating into all the different business processes. Having somebody that's actually driving each aspect of that operating model and as part of a kind of cohesive, integrated team is really important. What we have seen is that for most organizations right now, this people analytics function does sit in HR in some form. In most organizations, like Nick said, the organization has decided to actually identify people analytics as just one pillar of their overall HR operating model, and have a individual leader that's driving that as integrated into their overall HR leadership committee. But the reality is it's important that the HR business partners that are part of that people analytics function are actually deeply integrated into the business.
Thank you, Bill. And I think that's a great point on which to wrap up this first episode. We'll be back next time to talk about how we begin to move ourselves down this people analytics path, building this capability for our organizations. Thanks, Bill. Thank you, Nicholas. And thank you to our audience today for joining us at Capital H. Until next time.
This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, go to deloitte.com/about.